Hello everyone, welcome to this second session of GAAP. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Adrien Elias and I use he/him pronouns and I am the outgoing chair of the Graduate Student Committee of CASCA. CASCA, for the people who don't know, is the Canadian Astronomical Society of Canada. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, makes sense. Uh, this event, GAP, has been co-organized by the Graduate Student Committee and the Postdoc Committee of CASCA, represented by Matthias Bravo and Emily Deibert. Today, we're going to see how to write a research proposal for postdoc applications. And before we dive in, we have a couple of stats to show you guys. And by the way, I'm not in full screen
You want
mode.
to go onto full screen? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I completely forgot I was not in full screen. Thank you, Jess. Most of the registrants for GAP are graduate students for the biggest majority. Uh, Around 21% of people are postdocs already. So I think this is very cool because we really wanted to target those two types of populations the most. And then when you look at how many people are going to be on the postdoc job market, it's about 60 to like, yeah, 58% that are going to be for sure on the job market, and then around 13% are going to be like maybe. So a good chunk of people are definitely interested to attend these sessions. As this graph shows, uh, this session, the second session about the research proposals, is the one that most people are caring about. With 90 registrants said they would attend, so that's extremely cool. And yeah, we have this much enthusiasm as we go through the third and the fourth session. So today, for your information, we will have a coffee break in the middle of the presentation, so around 2 p.m., which will last like around 10 minutes. And then this time we will have a few minutes for questions at the end of each section. And so everybody will be able to like open their mic or their camera to ask their questions directly. And we think that having a few minutes for questions at the end of each section will be easier perhaps to yeah, like especially like if you don't want to wait until the end of the presentation to ask your questions that is related to the very beginning of the presentation, let's say, then you can do it much earlier, and that's I think we think it's better. All right, I will now let the speakers introduce themselves from left to right, starting with Eric.
Hi, everyone. I'm Eric Koch. I did my graduate studies at the University of Alberta, and in 2020, I accepted a SMA fellowship and joined the CFA. Uh, Along the way, I was also an NSERC fellow and had a few other grants that let me stick around for about 4.5 years. Um, and then 2 months ago, I joined the science staff at NRAO, where I'm now working on NGVLA software planning and pipeline development.
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Jess Speedie. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm currently a PhD candidate at the University of Victoria. In the fall, I'll be transitioning to be a 51 Peg B fellow at MIT. And I'm also the outgoing vice chair of the Graduate Student Committee of CASCA, the Canadian Astronomical Society. So Adrian and I have been working very closely together for CASCA-related duties in the last year or so. Yeah, together with the postdoc committee, we've collaborated on starting GAP. Is Emily here? I've just realized.
I don't know if she's here. Doesn't seem like it.
We can briefly introduce Emily on her behalf, perhaps?
Yeah, sure. Do you want to do it?
Or Matthias could as well. I'll go ahead. I'll go ahead. Yeah, so Emily and Matthias comprise the Postdoctoral Committee of CASCA, and Emily has contributed a lot to the slides that we'll show today. She's currently a science fellow at Gemini Observatory slash the NSF's NOIR lab, but she'll be coming back to Canada in the fall to be a Banting Fellow at the University of Waterloo.
Amazing. Yeah, and then there is me. I'm the moderator for this session, so I will be like checking the chat here and there for questions. Okay, so now I will stop sharing my screen and Jess, you can take over with screen sharing.
Perfect.
Yes.
Okay, can everyone see well? I can't, could someone give me?
Looks good.
Okay, cool. Okay. So before we really get started, just a few disclaimers about all of the content that you'll see in this workshop and broadly throughout the whole series as well. So this is really a little bit of a grassroots endeavor in the sense that all of the information that you'll see really comes from our personal experiences and those of our colleagues. A lot of it is really just compiled advice that we receive from supervisors and mentors, and it's not really official in any sense of the word. But we've also um, folded in a lot of the content from a couple places that you'll find online. So, for example, the AMP Up mentorship program for upcoming postdocs. They ran an amazing program last year and it's running again this year. And we have shared and borrowed some of the content from their slides, which are available also on their website. And we're advertising on our website as well that if you are interested, we highly recommend joining this program, AMP Up, for the upcoming year. And then finally, Taylor Hutchinson's postdoc job cycle guide on their website. Taylor was also a invited speaker for session 1, so folks may be familiar with her through our program as well. And then some additional resources. This is the same as what was shown in session 1, but just to remind you, take some time to read through some of these if you haven't seen them before. So there's some really nice articles on Astrobytes about a guide to writing postdoctoral applications in a 2-part series. The AAS also has some really nice information on their website. Astro Better has a wiki. There's a really nice article on Discover magazine, and of course, as we mentioned before, Taylor's website resources. And we really hope that this series of workshops through GAAP, session 1, 2, 3, and 4, we really hope that you'll find them useful and helpful, and that it will basically just introduce you to all the things that you need to know and help the whole process be less overwhelming. So as Adrian mentioned, the plan for today's workshop is as follows. So we've sort of organized the slides into these 7 sections. So we'll start by discussing the components of an application, and then go into basically a basic overview of the main topic of this session. So research proposals, and we'll also briefly talk about research statements. And then really focusing on the research proposal, what are the qualities of a strong one? We'll mention also basically some figures or visuals that you might like to think about including in your proposal. Also how to select a project or projects, how to develop them, and then really putting pen to paper, how and when to start writing, and then finish off with some big picture philosophy. And in between each of these sections, we'll pause, take some questions, and in between 4 and 5, we'll also take a brief coffee break, as Adrian mentioned. All right, so let's dive into it. So components of an application. So here's a list of basically documents that you may be asked to produce for a postdoctoral or a postdoctoral fellowship application. It's definitely the case that not all applications will need all of these documents, but this is kind of a catch-all list of all the types that you may encounter. So a cover letter, a research statement or statement of interests and previous and current work, a research proposal, topic of the session, CV, reference letters, and then some possible additional things which we'll also dive into, like a DEI statement, and a few others. So just to give you a sense of kind of the scope or magnitude of these documents, here's very, very rough page numbers for each type. And just to mention that sometimes the research statements and the research proposal would really be folded into one document. So that's how we get these large page ranges here. If they're combined, then you're looking at something more like 8 to 10 pages. There may be page limits on these other ones as well, so it's hard to predict, but here's some typical ranges. So we'll start by talking in detail about a cover letter. So this may not necessarily need to be included, as I mentioned. It really depends on the job, but if it is included, then it's really the first component of your application that is going to be seen, probably. So right off the bat, it's about making a good first impression. And so the cover letter should really express excitement, your excitement about this job. You want to draw your reader in and make them want to read the rest of your application, the rest of your proposal. It should also include some rationale for either your proposed institution or the institution you're applying to, description of why your research fits there. In terms of format, it typically has a sort of very formal header and footer with some to or from contact information, addresses, maybe official logos of the institution that you're affiliated with and the one that you're writing to. But again, it's probably only going to be one page, so you want it to be succinct and to the point. Sometimes the job ad will specify very specific information about you that they want you to include in the cover letter, but otherwise it's kind of up to you. So in this link here, we've provided some sort of general cover letter templates. This is just a general overleaf, template. So not necessarily specific to astronomy and not necessarily specific to postdoctoral jobs. But we've got a couple examples on the next slide. I think 3 examples that we can go into a little bit more detail. So here's a cover letter example template from the University of Arizona. So again, you can see the logos and the institution mailing address. It sort of starts with an introduction to you and what position you're applying for. Then transition into your research interests, a high level overview of your results and collaborations and whatnot. And then also diving into why you want to apply to this particular job, what you've done in your career so far, whether that's grad school or over a couple first postdocs, and of course, specify who you are wanting to work with at this institution and why you're a good fit for this role. So this template here also suggests that you might include the names of your reference letter writers. I personally have not seen a cover letter that includes this, but perhaps it's something you would want to think about. And then a closing and a greeting, and you might actually want to sign your name and a signature, but again, this is not necessarily needed. Here's an example from Taylor Hutchison. So again, you can see on the top the month, the date, address, and an opening line to the search committee. You are writing to apply for, you want to specify exactly what you're applying for, maybe where you found the advertisement, and a little bit about you. You're, let's say, a final year PhD candidate at a certain institution under the supervision of a certain advisor, graduating at a certain time. And then what do you focus on? Basically highlight your overall work and experience, describe your background, and basically the impact that your work has had, and a little bit about what you're planning to do as a postdoc in this position, and why that is so well matched to what you're applying for with this cover letter. Anything else to highlight here? Yeah, you may perhaps want to fold in some information about your experience with service, outreach, and DEI related things, just to sort of demonstrate that you're a broad individual, let's say. But again, this is optional. And then here Taylor also describes what's attached to the rest of this application. I would say if you're squeezed for space, this is maybe not necessary. And then, your name, signature, and address as well. And then finally, just for diversity, really, here's a third example. This is a letter that I wrote and submitted last cycle. So we have the address, date, etc. Always good to start off with a sentence describing, yeah, again, your strong interest, but also the specific name of the job and location, who you are, what your research focuses on, pursuits, methodologies, skills. Yeah, really describe your expertise and the impact that your research has had. If you have a pre-existing connection to the employer or the institution that you're applying to, it's really, really good to highlight that. If they know you, really, it's all the better. Yeah, and it's important to really say why you're interested in this job specifically, how you think you would integrate, and the kind of mutual benefits that would arise if you were hired. Yeah, I think that's mostly everything we wanted to say about cover letters. Eric, feel free to jump in at any time as well if you have like a small comment. Okay, so moving on to the CV. So the best way really to understand what makes a good CV is to just spend a lot of time reading other people's CVs, especially if they're a little bit more senior than you, but not too senior, just to sort of get a good sense of what a good CV looks like at your rough career stage. So spend a lot of time Googling folks if they have a public website and they have a public CV, give it a read and try to really understand how it feels to be the person reading and ask yourself, how easy is it to glean the important information, to really extract what you want to know about this individual, and reflect on what exactly about that CV makes that process easy or difficult. And once you sort of have read enough of them, you can kind of start to get a sense of how or what are the common ways that information is organized and presented, and which ways make it the easiest to really get what you want to know easily out of the document. An important caveat here is that in this case, you'll be reading public CVs, right? And it's not always the case that what appears on someone's public CV is the same, contains all the same information as what they would submit in a job application. There are maybe things that folks would not display publicly, but that they would use on their competitive job application CV. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so reference letters, I think there's a big potential for yeah, misconception, especially among sort of more junior folks about exactly what a reference letter is. I know that I lived with this misconception for a while. I kind of thought that a reference letter was like a cover letter in the sense that it's very short and basically like a one page, I approve of this person, very short statement, but um, actually, it's a lot more deep and lengthy and involved than that. These can be like 5-page long essays, basically, with the caveat again that this does depend on cultural norms. So, some countries in the U in Europe, for example, maybe it's a little bit more uh, common to be a little bit more sparse, a little bit more succinct, and maybe it's a fewer page type endeavor. But especially, I'd say in North America, these are very long documents, very detailed, and huge investments of time and energy on by the person who's writing them. And so yeah, just to keep that in mind.
I
Cool.
add something quickly there, Jess.
Go ahead, Eric.
Right. I mean, keeping this in mind that this can be a multi-page thing, it's worth remembering that and having that influence who you ask to write those letters. Some people may have the potential misconception that if you ask someone who is simply better known across the whole field but does not know you as well, well, they might be writing something much shorter. It's usually in your advantage to find 3 to 5 people who can really speak to your work and its impact in a lot more detail.
Yeah, someone who you have a really strong relationship with who will not find it easy to write 5 pages about you. Or sorry, not find it hard to write 5 pages about you. Yeah. Right. So we spoke a little bit about this in session one, but to the best of your ability, you really want to help your reference letter writers write their reference letters. So if you can share your application materials in advance, ideally like 2 to 4 weeks ahead of the reference letter deadline, which again may be different to the application deadline for you, because you really want to give them enough time to craft a letter that complements your application in terms of talking about the same stuff or talking about complementary stuff. It's also important, of course, to let your references know who you want to work with at each particular institute so they can work this into their letter. It's very possible that they have a relationship with this person already and can really speak to them very well. And it's also okay to give your references some guidance for the letters. So if you want them to really highlight something you've done or accomplishment in particular, or collaboration in particular that you know that they can speak to very well, then let them know. They may also ask you, so what would you like me to highlight and emphasize in in my letter? Although this is, not necessarily the case. It really depends on the person. Yeah, so you can see our GAAP session one recording for some more tips on reference letters. Okay, so a DEI statement, I would say this is not common to be asked in a postdoc job application, but you do encounter it sometimes. One example that I definitely know of is the 51 Pegasi B fellowship application. So this information is probably the most detailed information that I could find on exactly what could be asked of you in terms of writing a DEI statement. So the way that it's put in this case is that the DEI statement is really an opportunity for you to demonstrate that you have personal experiences or skills or willingness to engage in or lead activities that will advance diversity, equitable treatment, and inclusion of individuals, specifically from groups who have been historically underrepresented or excluded from the field. So again, a demonstration. And it can also be an opportunity to offer thoughtful ideas um, uh, regarding DEI in the field, sort of in more generally. You may wish to address some issues. So, for example, you may wish to discuss your understanding personally of the barriers that exist for historically underrepresented groups in academia at large, or specifically in your field. So, an example of some groups that this may include would be women, minoritized racial ethnic groups, LGBTQIA plus people with disabilities as well, low social economic status, etc. You may also wish to discuss any programs for underrepresented communities that you have participated in or led, or basically any commitments that you've made toward achieving equity, expanding inclusion, or enhancing diversity. You might also want to discuss your sort of long range, long-term career plans or goals for advancing DEI, and you really want to be offering evidence to support this fact. So really demonstrate your commitment with evidence, things that you have done to date that really support your intent. Um, right. And also in terms of thinking long term, how exactly do you plan to contribute to DEI as a postdoc? So what activities would you pursue? How would they fit into your research area or department or national context? And you really want to be as specific as possible. So really avoid being vague. Be specific about the context of something that you did or something that you want to do, what your role was or is, the scope, the impact. And if you're talking about what you plan to do in the future, make sure to be realistic about how much time and effort you can really afford to do this kind of work. And then a little bit more free form, you may also want to include your background. This is, again, it's an opportunity for you to offer some thoughtful information. Maybe your interests or some formative experiences that you had, some major challenges that you experienced, some major sources of inspiration for you, but basically anything that is not already covered in your other application materials that somehow informs or influences your approach to DEI. And then, yeah, if you are interested, there's some more background information about DEI and broadening participation in science, specifically in the US, that you can read all about in some of these links. And I think maybe just one last comment on this topic. We're scientists, and it can be very helpful in DEI statements to sort of treat it in a slightly scientific way, in the sense of providing evidence and looking at the data and statistics and offering thoughtful plans and ideas that are data-based.
So if I can add just one more thing to what Jess just said, effectively, I would think of this as you should have references in your DEI statement, right? You should be referring to specific studies and places where either people have looked into this in your own field or sociologists have. There is quite a bit of data, likely needs to be more in a number of cases, but there's more than enough that you can back up the statements that you put in there.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Thanks, Eric. Okay, and then some other possible additional components that you may be asked to include in your application. I have come across an application that asked for an abstract of my PhD dissertation, which has not, at the time, had not been written at all. So if this is the case for you, you're a final year graduate student, have not submitted your thesis yet, well, this might be the time for you to create such an abstract. It may also be the case that the application may ask for copies of selected publications, so literally upload a PDF of a paper of yours that you had published, or a list of your publications as a separate standalone document. So you should definitely have a list of publications in your CV, but sometimes a hiring committee or a fellowship may want to see this as a standalone document. Right, and it's always a good idea, if you haven't already, to have a ADS library of either first author or all author publications by you, which, yeah, some applications may literally just want to click on that and look at your ADS library. And then finally, rationale for proposed institutions. This is more relevant for fellowship applications. So this may also be a standalone document, but if it's not, you absolutely definitely want to work this into basically all other components of your application wherever you can. Okay, so transitioning now to talk a little bit about, okay, we've seen all these different components of an application. How are we going to organize ourselves, right? Like, how can we make it easy when we're applying for multiple jobs and they all have different application components requested? What's the best way to go about sort of keeping organized as we create more and more documents? So this is just a suggestion, a way that you may want to go about it. So I think it's very common to write postdoc job applications in Overleaf. So you may have, for example, just one Overleaf project, which you might call, Postdoc Applications 2025. And inside there, one single project, you have one folder for each job application. So here's little screenshots of the Overleaf directory window here. So one folder for each job that you're applying for. And then let's say we open name of job number 4 folder. Inside this folder, have separate .tex files for each application component. So here, for example, we have a cover letter, DEI statement, let's say, research proposal, research statement, which you can then compile separately. And if they need to be joined into one single PDF when you eventually go to submit it, you can do this after the fact, like in preview or something. Yeah, you may also have subfolders here, like if you compile your CV also as a separate compilation of different .tex files for each section, maybe you keep it in a folder inside this folder as well. And then one idea that I particularly found extremely helpful is for each application component, so like each .tex file, each separate document, it's really, really helpful if you copy and paste the job for the formatting specifications from the job ad and or the rubric and or the selection criteria into that document so that it compiles on the first page. So every single time you read a PDF copy or a compiled copy of your specific job application document, you are immediately faced with what you need to do, basically what the job ad is asking for. And this is super useful if you then send that PDF to someone, say for proofreading or basically feedback, they can be instantly oriented on the first page as to what is it they're reading, and what are the different guidelines and specifications that this document needs to satisfy. Cool, and I think that's it. So maybe let's pause for questions here. Does anyone have questions on these different components of a job ad, or sorry, of a postdoc application? I saw there was something in the chat.
Yes, there is a question. There is a question from Simran. So I can read it out loud. So when the let's say the application reviewers ask for a CV and a list of publications, should the CV no longer have a section for your own papers, especially if there is a strict CV page limit, but you are allowed to list all of your papers separately?
My understanding is that if a CV is requested separately from a list of publications, then it's completely redundant to also have a list of publications on your CV, um, regardless of whether there's a strict CV page limit.
I would agree. Um, though I think I would still recommend putting in a single statement, just highlighting I have authored these number of papers. Some people also put a number of citations, things like that. I'm not sure that's fully necessary, but just highlighting again the breadth of your work could be worth one page in even a short CV.
Yeah, 100% agree. Another question here from Carmi. Is there an example DEI statement that we can look at? Yeah, this is a great question. We will probably touch on this in later slides. What I can say is that I don't know off the top of my head of any generic public DEI statement that is intended to serve as a template for everyone. Because these can be quite personal. But yeah, we'll circle back to um, where to find examples of all these types of documents later in the session. And then
And
Chris,
just to quickly,
yeah,
oh, sorry, to quickly add to that, I mean, this is not going to be true for most parts of the application, but for things like DEI statements, you can look at some of the recommendations for faculty applications.
that's a good point.
What they are asking for is somewhat the same. The way that it would be framed is different, but I think you'll also find more examples in those.
Yeah, great point, Eric. Cool. And then a note from Chris, one could put a please see attached list of publications on your CV if you have them as a separate document. Sure. Yeah. Cool. Are we ready to Oh, we have a question here. Nair, please feel free to unmute and ask your question.
Hey folks, can you hear me all right? Yeah, just wanted to ask, I mean, maybe you folks don't have the answer, but like in the current political climate in the US and like the very, very unfortunate, like the anti-DI directives, Do you guys have any guidance on how to navigate that for our own applications, including DEI work and statements, especially for like national fellowships from NASA and the NSF?
Yeah, this is a great question. So I would say, first of all, whatever we say right now, is very possible to not hold, right? Like I feel like things are changing so quickly that any forecast anyone could make has a very non-zero chance of being wrong because things can change. But what I would say as a general principle is if a job application, if a fellowship, let's say, is asking for a DEI statement, then go all out on your DEI statement. That's obviously a place where it's safe if it's been asked for. Whether or not places will continue to ask for DEI statements in this context, I think depends on where their funding comes from and what kind of policies they're subject to.
I think you're also going to see some slight renaming, but the goal of certain statements being the same. So broader impacts and community engagement started to show up as a document on a number of faculty and staff proposals this past cycle, and that's including in the US. And so I agree, you're right that, this could change, and fundamentally you put in your application what they ask for. But keeping these things in mind, and just because it doesn't use the phrase DEI doesn't mean that it's not going to be something considered.
Yeah, great point. All right, let's barrel forward.
All right. So this is a short section. So I will pause in 3-4 slides, and you are very welcome to keep asking questions. But it'll be followed up with more on this research statement and proposal. And so if you think of something later that was in this section, just ask it at the end of the following one. Okay, so now we're getting into a little bit more of the details about some of these, what this session was actually for is writing your research statement and proposal. And so the key thing in the short section is just emphasizing that these are not the same thing. And, that's maybe not too surprising. And if you look at what they'll be asking for in these documents, you'll note that they are not the same thing. They don't necessarily have a lot of overlap. But what I would summarize this is you should be thinking about how these things support each other, even if they are written in slightly different ways. Right. So the statement is that is you are introducing your current or past research. What are the things that you have accomplished? What is the impact of your work on the field, and how does that set up other things? This is your ability to basically tell your science story up to that current point. And so as a result, it's a lot more narrative, right? It's describing what you have done. You should still be enthusiastic. You should still point out, where your work has provided great insight, etc. But it's a lot more, here is what I've done. In some ways, maybe you could imagine it being a significantly expanded summary of maybe 1 or 2 lines that some people would put on a CV. So this will tend to be a little bit more chronological. That doesn't necessarily mean that you are writing this as I worked on this project and then this project and then this project. You still want to think about how to group them together, because the most important part about making all of these different portions of your application fit together is that they tell this consistent story. So when you're writing your research statement, you should be having in mind, why am I including this in the statement? Every piece ideally should be trying to emphasize and provide evidence to back up and convince the reader that you have provided an excellent research proposal and they should fund your research. So getting into that, the research proposal, that's persuasive, right? This is like most proposals. If you've written an observing proposal, various other types of things, right? You are trying to convince them that this is your plan and that they should pick you from a list of what is often hundreds of different ideas. Why is your idea the best? Why is it impactful? And so just a bit more about this. I've said this in maybe slightly different words, right? But just laying this out for what this statement should have. It's about you as a researcher, right? Again, this is telling your story. It's building up who you are and providing evidence that you are the person to do the proposed research. And so you want to be emphasizing a number of things. Research impact is certainly a major portion, but what are the things that you developed along the line? Is it different pieces of code? Different way to visualize data? That's all sort of different pieces of evidence that you should put together. So not necessarily just the publications that come out of your work. And what this is really building towards is, why are you the best portion? Why are you the best fit for this particular position? And if it's a more open call for some sort of fellowship, why is your proposal, and for what you are proposing to do, why are you uniquely qualified and the best person to be doing that kind of work? And so you are trying to set yourself apart. Of course, this is just from yourself. So be enthusiastic, be realistic, but you do want to emphasize and be proud of your work. If it doesn't come across in your own writing, that you are not excited about the things that you have done, then it's not going to come across as exciting to anyone else who reads it. So, make sure it has some emotion in there. And then more broadly, right, just thinking about the impact, can you summarize what you have already done and how this has led to either next steps in your own research, which is probably leading into your proposal, but also the other aspects, like what other types of research has yours provided, right? You're building a framework, and it's not just you working on this. The most impactful research is you are building the framework that others are enthusiastic and want to spend their time building upon your idea. The proposal is, especially for a very research-based position, like most postdocs, this is what you will do during this position, right? And so there's a couple things that come into this, right? It's your immediate future work. And so that immediate portion needs to ensure that there are realistic deliverables on the timescale for when they will hire you, right? And so this brings into, I would say three different portions, right? So there's what you're currently doing, right? You have a good idea of your own field. You're trying to provide evidence as through this proposal that you are becoming an independent researcher and you understand what the most important next steps are, right? So what are the next questions that can be immediately answered in your field, and why are you the person to do that? Now, the realistic part is important, right? You need to have specific deliverables, like I'm going to write this paper or produce this type of code, and it needs to be realistic within that time period. But what people are looking for, what reviewers are looking for, is your ability to go beyond that, right? This is supposed to be a stepping stone in your career. And so you want to give them the impression that, yes, I know what the next steps are, but I also know what they're leading towards, right? There are some very big questions that, the very high level ones that we see in different decadal reports or other things like that. You are not going to answer all of that in a single PhD, and you're not going to answer that in a single postdoc. But what you are providing evidence is that you are working towards doing that, and that you are doing the necessary steps to hopefully answer that much bigger question, even if it's farther down the line. Okay. So that's actually all that's in this section. So let me just pause for a second, and please raise your hand, or if there's anything in the chat, please let me know.
Well, yeah, I actually want to jump on one of the bullet points here, the last one. I would say, yeah, thinking broadly, thinking bigger also about the future. So jumping off what you were saying, Eric, because it's a persuasive document, I think writing a good research proposal also demonstrates that you have those persuasive writing skills that will be necessary for writing grants. So the sort of defaultly assumed next step after a postdoc would be, faculty where your business is really writing grants. And if you can convince folks that you can get money, that you are good at writing proposals, whether for grants or postdocs, that's really, how everyone kind of makes their living. So It's very important to demonstrate that you have those skills like early on.
Yes, thanks, Jess. And I should have also made it clear. Please do jump in, of course, at any point. And yes, that ability to write grants is or write proposals, it will be useful for basically whatever path you go down as a professional scientist, whether that's in astronomy or not, is an incredibly valuable skill.
Mhm. I don't see any questions.
Okay, so I guess with that in mind, I'm going to move on to the next part. And if you did have a question about this previous part, we are going to be talking about similar things, but pop it in the chat or just hold it to the next section and we can come back to that. Okay. So how do you go about actually identifying, right, what is a strong research proposal? How do I actually put this thing together? And especially if you're going into this from your PhD, this may be one of the first opportunities that you are thinking about, not just a project that you've been developing with your supervisor, but it's what you want to do as a researcher. And there are aspects of that that can certainly be daunting. There's many ways to do it. There's many, I'd say, ways to fall off along the path. And so, what are ways that you can identify what is a strong research proposal, and also find examples to help, figure out help you figure out how you would want to best express your research ideas. So just to start off, we have a couple examples here. So this NHFP, this is the Hubble Fellowship, NASA Hubble Fellowship Program, I think. And so this is useful. I believe, yeah, this is word for word just what their criteria says, but I think it's worth really looking at in detail because they actually give some really specific points about what the reviewers will be looking for when they look at one of these research proposals. In this particular case, they also give you the percent breakdowns. Um, you know, Other smaller programs may not give you this level of detail. When you're breaking it down to, say, 45, 30, 25%, it means very likely that the reviewers are being asked to give a score for each portion. And so you should consider that when you're going through these different things too, what matters the most, while still making sure you have all of the different things that they're asking for. I'll just say another case where you might have seen this already is this comes up in a lot of the NSERC applications, right? This type of proposal is worth this much, or it's split into leadership and other things like that. And that's a similar idea. Okay. Right. So for this proposal itself, right, this is split up into a few different ways. And actually, I think it's maybe better, like Jess had said towards the beginning, there are cases where the research statement and the research proposal kind of become melded together. And even if they're separate documents, you can see here that the way that these are being looked at by the reviewers are kind of together, right? So there's your research proposal, it's going to be 45%. 30% is that preparation and past research, right? So really the preparation being the key, right? So how does the research statement support what you put in the research proposal and demonstrate that you're the person to do that work? There's also this component about demonstrations of leadership and your potential to do that. I believe we're going to come back to that a little bit longer. In this particular case, they have this thing called the golden buzzer, which I think is a fairly new thing, or at least the last time I applied to this, it was not there. It's worth just having a quick look through. So this is, if there are aspects of your application that a reviewer feels should be given a particular note, they can describe that basically. So they can write a summary of one thing that they found exceptional in your program that otherwise wouldn't be considered in some of these other things. Now, one of the reasons why I'm mentioning this is just, this is a formal way of addressing this, but this is what happens all the time on hiring committees, right? Someone knows someone else, and so they maybe have a little bit more information. And, that's not, it'd be nice if this was not the way that things work, but we're human, and this is often how it does. So just because they explicitly say and have this mechanism for the so-called golden buzzer, it doesn't mean it doesn't happen in other ones where it's not listed in the criteria. Just worth keeping in mind. Okay, but specifically for the research proposal. So for the Hubble Fellowship, this is going to be given, reviewer is going to give this a score out of 5. And here they have, these are pretty generic, apart from the very last word here, but it's just giving you a sense of what needs to be in that research proposal to get this score, right? So it's giving you this nice template about what they're going to be looking for. And I'd say it is written in a way that is generic enough that you could use this rough idea for just about any fellowship, right? So the a top research proposal, right? It's going to be compelling. Maybe it's groundbreaking in a completely different way, but it needs to be clearly described. There needs to be a clear outline, and the last point, it needs to be achievable within the duration of that fellowship, right? So I'm sure many of you have some wonderful idea about things that can be done in the future, ways to expand upon your research. One of the toughest things, or at least toughest for me personally, is then how do you segment that back down into something that is, small enough to be done within that time frame, usually about 3 years, but significant enough that it's still high impact. It's a little bit difficult to do, and we'll get into that in the following section as well. So just one more example here that is basically, right, it's another way of looking at these, or it's another way of expressing what reviewers are going to be looking for in a strong research proposal. This one from the 51 Peg B. And I think for more detailed explanations, you should probably ask Jess, because I suspect that she read this very carefully, given that she was awarded one this past year. But if you look through this, right, this is given a little bit more, here are questions that a reviewer might ask, but this overall components are the same that we saw before, right? It needs to be significant research to be a very well-rated program. It needs to be innovative in some way. The research approach needs to be well explained. It needs to be feasible. It doesn't not necessarily have to be extremely high risk. It needs to be able to have concrete results within that period of the fellowship. And then that last point, right? This is a bit more of how this connects back to the research statement. How are you qualified as an applicant, right? So it's making sure that that research statement is setting you up as, I am the person with the most expertise, and I am the ideal person to do this proposed research. So they are quite closely tied together. And so this is additional information from the 51 Peg B. As someone who does not work in planetary sciences, I hadn't actually looked at this in detail, but I'm glad Jess brought this up. This is a really clear explanation of what, even if this is not this particular call, about what should be going in a strong research proposal. So definitely worth having a close look at, even if you're not applying for this particular position. Do you have something to add, Jess?
Yeah, we will also return to this later in the session in terms of putting pen to paper. So yeah, we'll come back and look at this in more detail.
Okay. So those are a couple examples. That is what the call is going to give you. Is describing, it's trying to help you put together a compelling research proposal and telling you what they want to see. What will the reviewers be looking at? So how do you actually get examples of this? And in a lot of cases, this really helps to read as many examples as you can find, ideally ones that are actually strong. But you can imagine if you're going through this with those questions, some of the questions in the previous couple slides in mind, think about it as if you were reviewing someone else's proposal that they had given to you, right? So what are you looking for? Can you understand it? Do you understand the significance? Does it fit together? Does it seem realistic? You can kind of imagine yourself in the reviewer's shoes. And we'll come back to that a little bit later as well. But just sort of keep that in mind whenever you're reading these. other point that I think I wanted to mention here, but was not in the text, right? So that idea of, a mock review, how do you understand it, and using that to make your own writing better. Uh, that sort of curtails off of some guidance that even if you haven't quite heard it yet at the PhD level, you will hear it at the postdoc level. And that's these, if you get an opportunity to be a reviewer for almost any type of application, it is very useful. It can be a fair bit of time. It is an expectation as a professional scientist to provide service back to the community, but it can really help your own writing because it gives you an idea of what is happening on the other side. So that's just worth keeping in mind. If you are given the opportunity to do it, I would highly suggest you do so. Now, the other point here is that this has been kind of an issue for a long time. And so one of the nice things that came out a few years ago from the Hubble Fellowship Program is their anti-racism initiative. The old website was unfortunately taken down. However, as we discovered in the last few days, the AMP Up program actually has some of those applications that former fellows as part of this program have publicly provided. And that can be a really excellent place to look through, right? And so keeping in mind not just the type of proposals, but it is one of the most competitive programs. And so those are successful proposals that have really gone through the gauntlet. So they're definitely doing something right. Go ahead, Jess.
Yeah, I mean, just to emphasize the incredibleness of this database, because I mean, it's really a repository of successful Hubble Fellowship applications going back to like 2011 or something. So not every, Hubble Fellow has chosen to upload their application materials or necessarily their entire application to this repository, but I would say it's still a very significant resource because, yeah, because it goes back for so long, uh, and also this fellowship encompasses, all of astronomy. Like it's not just a themed fellowship for planets or cosmology or whatever it may be. So you can really learn a lot, and really orient yourself by just taking the time to read some of these PDFs. And it's really incredible, I would say, that this exists as at all. We're lucky in astronomy that the community is so incredible like this. So take advantage of that.
Yeah, not to age myself, but that was nothing when I was first applying for postdocs. I actually didn't realize it went back that far. So that's really nice. And just to then link that together, right, with what Jess just said, it spans astronomy. So if you want to pick up what is a strong proposal in an area that you do not understand, I suspect that you are going to understand what that individual wanted to do, even if you had almost no prior information. And that can be a really useful way, right? What are they doing that has allowed you in a very short period of time to know exactly what they want to do and what its impact is? Okay. Right. One last portion of this. So that's a great resource. The other way to do this, and again, just to emphasize that this is a common request, is to ask the people around you. It's easiest to probably ask the people that you already know, but it's also, again, it's a common request. It's okay to ask other people, especially if they are maybe in your field or if they are in the position for, the proposal in the application that you're writing right now, or it's really what you want to do. You should really feel free to reach out to people and just ask if they would be willing to share their research proposal. I would suspect many people are. Maybe you don't hear back in every case, but even if it seems weird reaching out to someone you don't already know, this is a really good way to really help yourself and strengthen your proposal. And there are from Taylor. There are some templates on how you might approach this to hopefully make this an easier ask for what is something that probably feels fairly awkward.
Yeah, and Taylor also has really nicely provided templates for like different levels of connection. Like if you are cold emailing someone versus, someone in a certain context versus another. So yeah, I mean, just really, it's food for thought, right? You obviously have a relationship or don't have a relationship with this person, and so you know best how to talk to them. But yeah, just to sort of spark the idea and make it really clear that it's okay to ask.
Mhm. And yes, it is probably most obvious to ask for the ones that were successful. But if there is someone that you're maybe quite close with, and you feel comfortable asking them, you could ask to see other applications that didn't do so well. So that's something that I have personally given out, and just even if you want to talk it through with that person, just maybe they'll have some better understanding of what didn't work, and when you're reviewing that, you can compare that to sort of ones that could be quite successful. In some cases, I would suspect there's not actually much of a difference. Just the threshold sometimes is high, and just because someone did not get the offer does not mean that they did not write a really excellent proposal. Okay. All right. So this one I think is getting towards, right? So you'll have your research proposal. We'll talk about it in just a second about coming up with the projects and what is sort of an appropriate level for different things. But you're probably going to have a limited set of proposal ideas, limited set of project ideas, right? You're trying to distill it down into your best ideas to give you the strongest shot. That doesn't mean you want to give the same research proposal every time. It does need to be tailored, and the degree to which it needs to be tailored depends a little bit upon the type of position that you're applying for, right? So, postdoctoral position that is for a specific project, and maybe you have 25 to 50% of free time on your own research versus a independent fellowship. Um, but the key thing here is just making sure that that proposal and the statement contain everything that that job advertisement has asked you to do, right? You're simply putting yourself at a disadvantage if you've written this excellent proposal for one type of application, and there's another one that, say, maybe it's attached to an observatory and it has a little aspect of, well, they'd kind of like to see what kind of practical skills that you have for dealing with data or things like that. You really do need to emphasize and make sure that you've addressed all of those points, even if the rest of the proposal was very well, or is otherwise very strong or very well suited for another similar proposal. So I think this was brought up in the first one. Just keep reading the job advertisement, and before you submit, just make sure you've hit all the points that they're asked for. Sorry, one second. Okay. I'm getting myself a little confused. I thought this was the last one. Anyways, I think we've largely been over large, portions of this, and this gets into coming up with your own project ideas, right? And so, like the reviewing and the other things that we've kind of talked about. But here are some specific questions that, as you're going through that process with both your own proposal and reading others, here are some of the common questions that will come up. And like these are the key questions that, as a reviewer looks at it, is it answered well? That's great. Is it clear? Can I tell immediately what the big picture is? These are the sort of the key points that, as someone looking through a stack of 100 of these proposals, they're going to be glancing through quite quickly, and they really just need the high level details or something to really draw them in. So make sure that you are covering these broad points.
Yeah,
All right, I
nice.
think that's the last portion of the section. So go ahead, Jess.
No, I'm just saying. I think
Okay. So if anyone has questions, we can pause now or in the previous section.
nothing in the chat so far, and no hands to report either. We can maybe give folks like a couple seconds in case someone's typing. I know I always
Absolutely.
obsess over, am I typing this? Am I phrasing it well? So I could take over the screen share in the meantime.
Sounds good. And we are planning to have a have some time at the end for questions in case you think of them a little bit later.
Do we just like steamroll into the next section?
Um, I think we should, given the time.
All right, yeah. Okay, let's do it. Okay, so this is the last section before we take a brief break for maybe, stretch your legs, grab a coffee, get some air. So yeah, really briefly, let's just touch on, I think, a really, really, really important component of a research proposal, which is the figures or the visuals. So you really want to be thinking about, proposal style figures and how that may be similar or different to paper style figures or talk style figures. So it's really important, I would say, that I mean, I think you want this in papers anyway, but specifically in proposals, definitely, you want the main message to immediately jump out at the reader and immediately be obvious what this is really about and how every inch of this figure is serving your arguments because it's part of the persuasive writing. So yeah, you want to maybe think about annotating figures and definitely including a descriptive caption that summarizes the punchline. Like in some cases, you really can't make these things too obvious. You can't be over redundant. Well, maybe you can be over redundant, but you really want to make sure that what your message is comes across really clearly. So yeah, the next couple slides are basically, again, just some food for thought, sort of figure types that you may like to consider in the context of preparing proposal style figures. So yeah, and just to mention before I dive into it, a lot of these ideas were taken from this book, Marketing for Scientists by Mark Kushner, who at some point was at NASA. I'm not sure exactly where he's at now. This is from 2012, I think, this book, Marketing for Scientists, How to Shine in Tough Times. But right, so just to credit where these figure type names are really coming from. So the first example that's really relevant for proposal style figures is the so-called beautiful butterfly figure. So you can imagine, oh, there's a beautiful butterfly, right? Like this is something that captures your attention. That's really the purpose. It's a pretty picture. It's okay, it sounds superficial, but it's eye candy. And I think this is like a guilty pleasure amongst all astronomers, right? We really like to look at pretty pictures. Eye candy it captures our attention for sure, which is really what you want to do in these kinds of proposals. So you could potentially use this type of figure as, let's say, a schematic that's uh, visually conveys the common thread behind all your proposed projects. But yeah, something that really captures the imagination and attention of your reader right off the bat. So just as a brief example of what such a figure might look like, this is from one of my own proposals last year. So you can see it is a little bit schematical. There are three main research questions that this proposal was proposing to address. And, and with the exception of this over here, which is a real dust map from WISE, everything else is kind of schematical. But it sort of instantly captures your attention in terms of, ooh, like what's going on here, right? Like I want to read more of what's happening here. The second kind of figure that I think is really, really useful as a proposal style figure is the so-called Jenny Craig figure. So hopefully everyone here's old enough to get that reference, but I'm sure we've all seen those ads for the weight loss program, right? The Jenny Craig weight loss program where they sell the program by showing you a before and after photo. Here's what you have now. Here's what you'll have if join the program or basically buy the product. So this kind of figure is that exact same idea. You have a before and an after, a direct side-by-side clashing comparison between what the state of the field is now or what the problem is right now versus what you'll get if you hire me, right? If you give me the job to do what I do to get you from here to there. So yeah, it really says this is what you have now, and this is what you have in the future if you hire me. So the sort of fundamental principle here is what you are selling is your product, right? Your ability to do the research work. And the sort of analogy given in the third bullet point here is you're selling the blender by showing a picture of a margarita, like what you are going to be getting via the blender. So a blender by itself, a picture of a blender by itself is maybe not so appetizing, but everybody loves a margarita. So you can sell the future, or you can sell yourself, I guess, by identifying what the future will bring. So here's another example of that from one of my own applications. So we got side by side, exoplanets from 1994 to 2004, and then protoplanets from 2004 to 2054, right? So here's what we have now, and here's what we want to have in the future. And the idea is, I'm proposing to do some stuff that will put protoplanets on the same trajectory as exoplanets. So side by side, before and after kind of thing. Okay, another kind of figure or visual that you might want to include in a research proposal is basically a timeline. So including a timeline really shows that you've thought through your research program and you're confident that it's actually accomplishable in the funded time or in the duration of the fellowship or job. So even if you don't actually include one of these in the proposal, just making one and performing the exercise of making one and saying, here's where time t equals 0, and here's 3 years later or 2 years later or whatever it may be. Here's what I want to do. Here's my concrete set of deliverables. Here's how much time each step is going to take me. Can I actually bring this thing to fruition in the proposed time frame? So it's very valuable as an exercise in and of itself, but to also include one in your proposal really highlights that, okay, this thing is feasible. This is not talking in the stratosphere, like this could really work. So here, actually, let me go back. You can see each of the colors here kind of highlights, let's say, a different project title, with each one sort of culminating in some sort of deliverable, which you can imagine is a paper. And yeah, basically at any given time, any vertical slice here, are you doing too much, or is it actually reasonable to be focusing on this many horizontal lines at a time? And in this particular case, we also have an example of somebody proposing for data that doesn't already exist, and how many opportunities at such a proposal do they have? So that's also something to think about is what are the cycles? If you don't have the data that you need already, how many opportunities to compete will you have? So here's a second example. Two general projects kind of split into 3 deliverables. So again, you can imagine at any one time that the person who's proposing to do this research will not be sort of overburdened, but there's a very clear structure for basically, culminating at some kind of deliverable, which in this case were 2 papers, but also a community tool, so a public algorithm to do a certain thing. I think that's the last one in this section. Yeah. Shall we pause for questions on the topics and yeah, basically anything about figures or visuals before we break for coffee?
There is one question in the chat. Lowell is asking, how did you generate, Jess, the beautiful butterfly figure?
This beautiful butterfly figure. So, like I said, this guy here is real data. Basically just plotted and then manipulated in PowerPoint to fit, I suppose, with the rest of what's going on here. So this disk here, again, just generated in Python, a couple of arrays, and then, yeah, made up a bunch of structure for these rings, projected it to some inclination. Yeah, computed all of these here are like different points with different opacities to sort of emulate planets going around the star. And then this guy is a scaled down version of this guy uh, with, yeah, literally just PowerPoint annotations going on here.
So I definitely agree, Jess. This is a beautiful figure. And yeah, so I think some of the best proposals have these really well put together figures. So my question to you is, how long did it take you to make this figure?
Okay, so there are definitely different iterations of it. This, I would say, if I recall correctly, was from one of my last proposals. So it's gone through many iterations to become what you see here. Over the period of like 2 months. So it's gonna be hard to say. I mean, yeah, all of it is from scratch as well. Um, yeah, I really can't tell you. I don't know. It took as long as it took. But a
I
while.
think, yeah, exactly, a while, right? And even if it was used for other things, right, that's like you were thinking about this or updating it and getting people's feedback for at least 2 months.
Yeah,
And this looks like something I'm sure you will use again. But yeah, definitely keep in mind with some of the best figures, they're incredibly impactful, but they are not done the night before. They involve a lot of work and usually feedback from a number of different people.
for sure. Did I see something else come up in the chat?
Yes.
Uh, okay. Have we addressed this one yet? From Xiaocha? What should I do if I don't have a detailed research plan based on funding? Um, I mean, brain.
I think you're cutting out, Jess.
Oh dear.
Now you're back. Say it
I'm
again.
gonna stop just to reduce my bandwidth, see if that helps. Um, right, so we were talking about the question from Xiaocha Liu. What should I do if I don't have a detailed research plan based on funding? I'm not 100% sure I understand the question. Maybe if you're here, it would be helpful to maybe unmute and ask your question like that. Unless, Eric, do you have a good understanding of what's being asked here?
Uh, so definitely open to clarification, but I would say if you are applying for a specific postdoc, it's sort of, I would treat that as one set unit of funding. And so your job in that proposal is to fit your proposal into that period of funding. Um, talking about the table you just wrote based on funding.
Right. So, I mean, in the proposal, by writing a proposal, it's like this is what I'll be able to do if I have the funding. Um, yeah,
I
I
guess
think,
this could also be if there's right, if you're proposing for more data as well that hasn't been taken already, and you're showing that you're recognizing that you might not get it the first time. Um, yeah, so I would say that that general idea of on a longer term scale, that is an exercise in what we'll talk about right after the break, mitigating risk and giving the reviewers more confidence you'll be able to do this. Uh, I think, yeah, in terms of funding, you you should treat the postdoctoral fellowship or any given one as it's a set unit of funding for a set period of time and fit everything within there. The broader question, though, like how would you then separate this out or longer time with different funding? That is in large part what a faculty application will become, right? Which portions will you target? How will you fund your research over, 5 to 10 year period?
yeah. Okay, I think let's set a time for the break. So we're sitting at 1.5 hours into a ideally 2-hour workshop. And we have about 3/7 of our slides left to go. So I'm thinking we should err on the side of a shorter break. Adrian, how do you feel about that?
No, do you want to do like 7 minutes
Okay,
or 5 minutes? Do you want 5 minutes?
let's say 5 minutes, I think, yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, so we'll come back at, yeah, in precisely 31 past the hour.
Awesome.
So I'll share my screen and make sure that we have that playing it the whole time. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Okay, see you guys in a bit.
Okay, so following up on the next section, project selection and development. And I'm going to go through the first part of this a little bit more quickly, just because it had quite a bit of overlap with some of the examples of those research proposals that we saw before. So, I believe the slides will be available as will this recording, but if you're wondering why I'm going slightly quicker this time, just keeping the limited time we have in mind. All right. Right. So as we saw for the Hubble Fellowship, the 51 peg, what were those guidelines really coming down to? I think this is a very succinct way of putting it, right? So what should the research project be as you're trying to figure out, which should I put into a proposal, which is usually something like 2 to 3 is a pretty typical length, right? So is it novel, right? Are you doing something that's new? Are you doing something that's original? This is fairly straightforward. All of us are doing some form of research or another. If it wasn't original or it wasn't novel in some way, we probably wouldn't be doing it. But if it's more novel or really can lead to a new area, that perhaps makes it more compelling. That leads into the second point. Is it impactful, right? How is this going to affect the broader field? And, why should someone else in your field or outside of your field care about the work that you are proposing to do? This is often also closely tied into, well, is it timely? There are a number of things that you could do, but trying to prioritize what are the most important things to do and demonstrating that is an important part of providing this set of projects. Right. So why is now the time? Right. And in some cases, this can be pretty straightforward. If you're an observer and you've been waiting for JWST to come to online, now it's online. Look at these incredible results. I'm saying we should do, maybe we have a prototype. Now we should do the definitive study. So some things along those lines. What are the past advances that either the field has come up with or you have come up with that makes this the best time to do it? Crucially, can you actually do it? And more crucially, for the postdoctoral position, can you do this in the period that it's actually that the fellowship will be going over, right? And so, you do want to choose things that are ambitious. They should be presented positive and enthusiastically, but they should be realistic, right? You need to be able to demonstrate that you can actually do this within the time period. And of course, that links into the final one. You need to be, giving concrete deliverables. And so in the example that Jess showed before with the timeline, that was a couple publications. Those are probably the most normal ones that we might think of, but it can be other things like different tools, composite catalogs of a certain type or a certain time period, something that will be, very obviously beneficial to the field as a whole, those types of things. Jess, did you have a comment? I saw you briefly unmuted.
Oh yeah, just on the timely point. So like you want your proposal to be obviously a must do, but if it's a must do and a must do now, that's like next level. I really, yeah, just want to emphasize like timeliness adds like one more dimension to how to the compellingness or the convincingness. Like, oh man, we need to do this. We need to do it now. Yeah, just to emphasize that.
Agreed. Yeah. Yeah. So the more of these you checkpoint and the stronger, I suppose, you checkpoint them as. Anyways, that was a bad analogy. Hey, you know what I'm talking about. Anyways, moving on. Now, I like this. This is actually something that I know Jess put in, and she got some portions of at least this visualization from Ryan Loomis. And this is thinking about how your projects vary between their risk and their reward. And you'll see this in a number of different contexts. I actually hadn't seen this in exactly this type of context, but I do really like it, right? So the basic idea here is that you have two axes, right? X-axis is your risk, Y-axis is your reward. And we can segment this into different portions, right? And you can think about, if I have this idea, where does it fall? Or at least where does it fall at this given amount of time or at this particular time, right? So high reward, that's pretty obvious. You're making a really big discovery. It's the type of things that you want to get a press release, right? These are the important things that we're all hoping to do in our work. The high risk, maybe this could be a high reward, but there's some aspect of it that would really give someone pause as to whether or not it could be done as a whole, or maybe more specifically related to the timeliness. Can it be done reasonably now, or can it be done in terms of the relevant time frame, which here is the length of what you're applying for a postdoc? So you can segment this into a couple of different ways, right? So largely, the axis that you're caring about here is this risk axis. We all want high impact results. We want to be farther up on the y-axis. If you don't think there's going to be much reward, why are you spending your time doing it? So largely, as you're trying to sell people on these great ideas, you probably think it's a great idea because it probably has a pretty good reward associated with it. And so the question really comes down to understanding where it lies in this sort of risk axis. And so we'll get into a couple examples about how to lower or consider the risk of a project as a whole. This is the part that I particularly liked from what Jess and Ryan had added here. And if you just think about where in this space do different fellowships lie, right? And so Hubble is extremely competitive and they want the most impactful results. So it is effectively high reward, but low risk, right? It's the most obvious things to do with what can be done now. Now, you might have other types of fellowships that can go a little bit farther up into a little bit more of a risky component. The main thing, of course, is that everyone wants there to be this high reward with the results that are coming out. That's why you're suggesting yourself as the person who should be the recipient of one of these fellowships. But where this actually lies depends a little bit more on what the funding body or what that individual doing the hiring is actually looking for. And Jess will get into that into the next section as well. But I think the more useful thing as you're mapping out your own projects is as you're coming up with these ideas and answering those points that we had in the previous slides, it's giving yourself a sense of where do my projects live, right? So one proposal is usually about 2 to 3 projects. And so one visualization is to consider where each of those projects lie in this space. And if you can make it more exciting or have them be connected together and potentially more impactful, but crucially, how do they connect together and sort of as a package, how do they map out into this risk space? So this particular example here is maybe you have 2 things that are pretty high impact, but they're really safe. It's like, I have this data set, it's the clear next step. Well, perhaps that gives you a little bit more ability to say, well, there's this really cool thing, and I'm not quite sure it's going to work. It's feasible. We can do it with the types of simulations we have available, the types of computing resources, observatories, etc. But I need to know more about 1 and 2. And so as a result, this is very exciting, but maybe I can still pose it as this is realistic, even if it's a bit riskier, right? So it's considering this as a package, as a whole in your proposal. Just to finish the section off, right? So what contributes to lowering the risk, right? So, if it's something that has specifically that you've done before, right? Have you come up with a method that enables a better measurement or a new type of measurement? but you've done it on a prototype and now the project is expanding that or doing something in a different way. That's a great way of, obviously building on something that would be in your research statement. Hopefully doing something still very high impact, but you've lowered the risk because you've demonstrated an example already. Something pretty common for, I'd say, a lot of observers is the data is already in hand. You can say, I'm going to get 4 ALMA large programs in the next 4 years, and I don't doubt your ability to write excellent proposals, but that's just not likely, right? And so having that data already in hand can really lower that risk. A key thing to think about as particularly with fellowships that you can take to different places is where you want to take that fellowship, right? You need to demonstrate that you are a good fit, but critically that, right, why are you going to this place? Well, you'd hopefully be surrounding yourself with people with slightly different expertise so that when you join them as a group, everyone effectively gets stronger. And your projects have less risk because you're in an environment that's going to support your growth as a researcher, but also enable these projects in a unique way. And the last point is really key, right? You do want to eliminate negatives. And I would also say to be realistic about the risk associated with a particular project. Simply not addressing it in the proposal is a very easy way for someone to come up with this sort of like, oh, well, I thought of this idea. They haven't addressed it. And because of that, I'm going to assess this as having a lot more risk than maybe you would think about it. So be positive, be realistic, but don't shy away from, the fact that you are doing something new and original. There's always some level of risk attached to that. And that is the end of that section. Do we have any questions?
None that I can see so far.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing so you can grab it, Jess.
All right.
I think in the interest of time, why don't we continue on? And if you have questions, either save them for the end or continue putting them in the comments or the messages, and we'll address them in a bit.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay, so let's get towards more like brass tacks, and talk about really the how and the when of starting to actually write. Because at the end of the day, we need to produce a document, a PDF, it needs to have content. So yeah, let's get into some more practical details. So I would say the number one key ingredient in a research proposal is a research question or questions. This is really like it can't be emphasized enough. Every research proposal needs a research question or a set of questions that are related, and the questions drive the proposal. What you really want to do is state a research question and then think about how to match it with a single research tool that will answer the question. So a tool here could mean an approach, methodology, maybe a data set that exists or doesn't exist. Maybe you need to create things that don't already exist, an algorithm, write some new code, whatever it may be. But the absolute key thing is this is a research tool that will not address the question, not make progress towards answering the question, but answer it. Like really question and answer hand in hand via this research tool. Okay, so where do you get questions from? Let's talk about brainstorming research questions. So let's maybe take a second and close our eyes and imagine that we were magically given 3 answers from a magical all-knowing genie in a bottle, answers to any questions we want, right? Like just take a second and think about in my field, what would I want to know? Like if I could just instantly know something, instantly have the answer, what would be the most impactful questions? Like what do we really want to know? If you could ask absolutely anything and just instantly know the answer, what would you ask? So I feel like coming from it from that perspective really gets down to the core of what do we want to know? Like, let's imagine we have no limitations. It's just magic genie, all-knowing genie. Like, we'll find out. They'll tell us what would we want to know. So in doing this kind of exercise, what we're effectively asking ourselves is like, what are the big open questions in the field? And this is also where the component of like being ambitious really comes in is let's ask ourselves what are the big open questions and how we can address them. So everyone will have their own sort of niche or set of skills and expertise, and think about how you can take off a piece of that big open question and flat out answer it. So in this way, you're linking your work and your own individual goals as well to the sort of major astronomy goals. So you might, for ideas or broader context, take a look at, let's say, the Astro 2020 Decadal Survey, or more Canadian, the Long Range Plan 2020, to think about, what are others caring about in my field and more broadly. So here are some links to those documents where you may take a look and just really orient yourself in terms of the general landscape on this sort of, yeah, decadal timescale or long range plan timescale can be very useful for just making sure that you are seeing everything, right? Okay, so this is an exercise stolen from the AMP Up program that I was kind of hoping we could like take 5 minutes and actually do. I'm not sure if we're really going to have time for that. So maybe we can include this just as sort of, let's say, homework or like a take-home exercise, which I think is really, really beneficial. So if anyone's familiar with Mad Libs, you know how this goes. It's a fill in the blank kind of exercise. So if you can fill in this Mad Libs very easily for whatever project you are doing the exercise with, then you know that it's a very strong project. So the sentences go, broad, very obviously important topic is super important. Recent progress on this topic includes some literature reference and some other literature reference. However, those other people's work falls short of such and such lofty goal because of such and such limitation. And this means blah, 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 something that's, not ideal, pretty bad. So in other words, we are very clearly describing this thing's super important, this is where we're at, this is our limitation, and this is why it's a problem. So then enter you, right? Your research will overcome by blank heroic solution. Okay, so if you can describe it this succinctly, it really makes helps you understand that you're really getting to the core of what's going on. So I'm applying to such and such fellowship to support a research program that will deliver, and then insert concrete deliverables. So when you're brainstorming research projects, if you can really easily fill in these kind of blanks, then that means that you've really understood what you're doing, what your proposal is about, and these are the kinds of things that you want your reader to immediately understand as well. Okay, so that's a take-home exercise. Okay, in terms of putting pen to paper here, so it can be really daunting to start with a blank page, right? How do we go from zero to a convincing, compelling research proposal? So what is the first, how do we actually put pen to paper? How do we make the first mark? So I think it can be really helpful to start your first draft as actually just a sequence of responses to the prompts in the selection rubrics from the job ads, because you know that you want your final draft to address all of the prompts, right? All of the sections of the rubric, all of the sort of points, I suppose, that the reader will be going through as they assess your application. So if you know that this content needs to be in there in the end, why not start there and use that as the building blocks and then basically tie them together into a narrative? And in the process of doing that, this will also help you weed out, the stronger project ideas from the weaker ones. If this is easy to do for this project, then you know that that's something that's going to be that you're going to want to stick with and go forward with incorporating into your application. So, okay, what exactly are these prompts, right? So this will absolutely vary depending on what job you're applying for. And so what I've put in here is from earlier on in the session, we talked about some of the prompts from the 51 PEG, I think. Move your face, Eric. Yeah, from the 51 PEG rubric. So here we are returning to that and closing the circle. So in the 51 PEG rubric, there are literally a series of prompts that you can literally just start typing the answers to. So like paste the question and then your response, and that can be the first draft of your research proposal that you can then share with, let's say, an advisor or a mentor to start get feedback on how strong are the answers to these questions really. So the first question, and I think there are 6 that we'll go through, is simply to describe the problem. So what is the problem that your research is trying to address? What is the critical barrier to making progress in the field that exists? And why is this problem important? So yeah, literally just type your response right underneath the question in a document. Number 2, to describe the solution. So this is your proposed project. How are you going to solve this problem? What is the overall goal and objective? What kind of superlatives can you use to describe the goal? So superlatives are, I'm actually not super up to date on the definition, but basically like, you know, let's say first or biggest or most or superlatives, right? Like ways in which this is far along on like one certain adjective direction. And also, what are the deliverables of this project? Can you give a general outline of the activities, the milestones, the overall timeline? The second prompt is basically to describe your approach, so your methodology. What novel concepts or tools or approaches or technologies are you going to develop and then employ? And how does this compare or contrast or complement other activity currently happening in the field? In other words, how does this approach, what is the approach, but then how do you also distinguish it from what's currently happening? And getting back to the timeliness, why was this not possible before? Why is this approach, in order for an approach to be novel, it's kind of, maybe it wasn't possible before. Fourthly, really describe the innovation. So we said that this was not possible before. We said that it's not actually challenging. Like
One sec,
maybe there's
Jess.
a set.
You cut out for about 10 seconds.
10 seconds? Okay, that's not so bad.
It
I'll
was,
start at
it
the
was
beginning
very
of the.
short.
Okay, thank you so much for letting me know. Okay, so we said in the previous point that this idea is novel, but in what ways exactly? Like, can we describe this innovation? This might mean that there are existing research approaches or ideas that actually your research is challenging. Maybe there's a set of assumptions that's very common to make in the field, and maybe something about your proposed research like comes up against this and challenges this. That's good to highlight. And also, this innovation, this approach, why is it the best for reaching your targeted goals? Like, why is this the solution to the problem? And then fifthly, describe the risk, and in brackets, low, right? You want this to be low risk. Why or how is the strategy well reasoned? So, yeah, really nice word for this is cogent. How is the strategy cogent and appropriate? Do you have the resources that you're going to need? Is your proposed timeline reasonable? Tell me what the risks are. Don't necessarily brush them under the rug, sweep them under the rug. Like, I'm probably going to think of them. I'm an independent thinker and I'm critiquing your proposal. So tell me what are the risks and how are you addressing them? And also, like, why you, right? This is getting back to what Eric was talking about. If you have previously demonstrated that you can do something like this, then we are more confident that we know that you will deliver. And then finally, the impacts. So if your objectives are met, what are going to be the broad, long-lasting, cross-cutting, or catalytic impacts to the field? And why should this be done now? Why should people outside the subfield care? And just generally, yeah, what are the long-term outcomes, even potentially beyond the fellowship term. Why is this a must be done? So if you can literally just type out, stream of consciousness, some answers to all these questions for your research, your potential research projects, I think that can really help concretize and solidify and distill your ideas, as well as starting the initial drafts. You finally have content in a document. And then some final miscellaneous tips to just wrap out this section. You really want to lean on your support network. As we mentioned before, ask people to share their applications with you. Build up a bank of previous applications to start to really learn the language of what makes a proposal a strong proposal. In terms of writing and persuasive writing and clear writing, learn how to start each paragraph with the main message of that paragraph. You might have seen in some research proposals that you've read before that sometimes folks bold certain sections or certain sentences. That might be, the key point that the writer wants you to take away from that section. And if you start the paragraph with that message and then the rest of that paragraph serves to just back up and support that first sentence, that can be a really great way to basically write a strong proposal. So talking about learning the language, learning the structure as well. Think about that as you're reading examples. And start early, for sure. Start brainstorming research questions now. Have conversations about them with your mentors. Get feedback from a wide variety of people. Something that's basically the benefit of feedback is that something comes to your attention that you would never have thought of yourself. So for example, it would never have occurred to me that the word nascent would be a word that not everybody knows. Talking about young planets, right? Nascent planets, well, young planets, baby planets, they're just, coming into nascence. But if I had not given such a proposal draft to someone who had never heard this word before, I wouldn't have known that was, yeah, basically it's about challenging your assumptions about what you think somebody will understand, is really the aim of the game. And if you are right now part of that, like roughly 20% of the registrations for GAAP, who's not going to be on the job market this fall, consider starting to make a note or list of research questions that you come across now. Start generating a bank to because it's easier to whittle things down than to come up with things from scratch. So do a favor to your future self in that way. All right, and we are on our last section. How are we doing? I also saw some questions come through the chat.
They were mostly comments.
Okay.
So I actually, just in the interest of time, because I think here, let me share. I'm going to actually suggest we skip over a handful of these because there are a lot of things that we actually ended up getting into in one part of another, and it's kind of just describing it a different way.
Sounds good.
And so I'm just going to end on these last two, right? So there was some language about leadership all the way throughout. I mean, one way to be a leader, right, is to be able to be the person who comes up with it, show that you're leading in a new area, you're developing it. But just one other to note, and especially as you look to maybe the people you admire in your field, it's not just them doing their research. Those people are very effective at getting the whole field together and working towards their view. And so it is a little bit more of the more broad sense of leadership, not just, that research group, but how does that person motivate and catalyze the field as a whole? It's one thing to consider. And then the last point that Jess, I think, put in, I think is really key here, right? So you've probably considered or you've started to look at some of the types of proposals, and you may have had this idea that, I just shouldn't apply because I'm not a good candidate for X, right? So some things to keep in mind. And Jess, do you want to lead this part?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I feel like bringing this up is really, 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 really important. So yeah, and it's also a really good note to end on. I think we're all going to feel this feeling at some points, especially during job application season, in all sorts of ways. And so I think it's important to like bring this to the surface and have a conversation about it and bring it out into the open and make sure that that we can talk about this because it's really, 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 really important. We're all going to feel like, oh, I'm not a good candidate for such and such application, prize fellowship, or whatever it may be. And so like I shouldn't apply. But I think if you have certain information, that will really help. So keep in mind or remind yourself when you have this feeling that successful applicants of whatever job are often surprised or in disbelief themselves upon receiving their offer. It's not necessarily uh, guaranteed that everyone who receives whatever fellowship thought that they would. I'd say more often it's a huge surprise and yeah, not necessarily an expectation at all whatsoever. And in terms of just sort of more big picture philosophy, like if you want to go anywhere interesting in life, I think that is by default associated with the potential for rejection. And sort of how often you get rejected is really just a function of how ambitious you are or aren't. So yeah, this is really just like encouragement to take those risks, apply for that job or postdoc position or fellowship, and throw your hat in the ring. Like just throw your hat in the ring and see what happens.
Just one final thing to add on to that and connecting back to that last slide on leadership. Whoever may, or whichever names may have popped in your head as we were talking about who is a leader in your field, absolutely everyone in that position has received way more rejections than they have acceptance, right? There are many cases where it takes multiple cracks before you get, the program you want, the proposed or position you want. Positions are a little bit harder. They can be here and there, right? But it takes multiple goes, and just because someone has had so much success, you're only seeing the success, you're not seeing all the other components that was along the way.
Yeah, so
So
true.
apply,
And Chris,
including for things like the Hubble Fellowship. Give it a
oh,
shot.
give it a shot. And I think also Chris has just pasted a really nice piece of advice he was given by an astronaut once, which I'll quote here. It's not your job to decide whether you're a good fit or not for such and such job. It's the selection committee's job to do that. So don't try and do their job for them by self-limiting your prospects and like not applying. I think that's really, really good piece of advice too. Also just take this chance to highlight that the entire slide deck, including the slides that we skip for time, will be uploaded to the website so you can see absolutely everything. And also, yeah, feel free to reach out to us independently if you have questions, or maybe just to highlight, I'm going to steal the screen share for just one more second here. Right, if you don't know it already, we have a little question box button on the website here. If you want to submit questions at any time, anonymously to, the organizing committee who are, I can tell you, actively creating the presentations, sometimes not so far in advance of the next workshop. So if you'd like to submit a question, we will try our best to incorporate it and answer it into the next workshop series, or sorry, workshop session. So this can be a way to sort of influence the content that you want to see as well. Cool. Shall we wrap it up?
Yeah, I don't think we have other questions. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.